Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here this evening. Pretty exciting step in this process as we embark upon the master planning for the Port Gamble Forest Heritage Park. Just wanted to start off this evening with a land acknowledgement, and that is the Kitsap Peninsula is the home of sovereign Indian nations, namely the Squamish and the Port Gamble S'Klallam tribes. And for those of you who had the opportunity to attend our last session, I went over probably a little bit longer version of the history of how this property came to be. But ultimately, it was born out of a lot of passion and excitement and ideas that kind of percolated out of the community. And this process really is an opportunity for us to take those ideas and think in a grand way, but at the same time, embrace the reality that we can't do it all and we can't have it all, right? So this is an opportunity for us to embark on the conversation about opportunities and challenges. And I think this is sort of that fitting step as we start to continue to coalesce what that master plan might be for this property. So thank you again for being here. This is only as good as the folks that are involved in the process and trying to share those ideas and aspirations. So thanks again for being here, and I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Commissioner Gelder. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy and thankful that you're giving us a piece of this amazing sunny evening to be with us tonight. My name is Alex Wisniewski. I'm the director of Kitsap County Parks Department. Tonight marks the second official public meeting of the master plan process for Port Gamble Forest Heritage Park. Tonight we'll be focusing our efforts on programming and associated opportunities and challenges that come with that. The feedback and involvement you provide tonight, which there will be some interactive components, will certainly help inform and guide us into the next phase of the master plan, where we'll get into spatial planning and begin to see park design concepts actually starting to take shape and live and breathe on maps. So we start to get into the fun stuff here. Thank you all for joining us again, and really looking forward to this and appreciate it. And I will turn it over to David. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Judy, I think we can go ahead and skip to the next slide. I think, Commissioner Gelder and Alex said enough already to get us going, so I won't spend too much time on this slide, but we've done a lot of work. The team has done a lot of work to put together all of your ideas, which will make up the opportunities which will be considered for the master plan. So tonight we definitely want to drill into those. Let's go ahead and go next slide though. I'd like to reintroduce the team here. So I'm David McBride. I'm the project manager for the Kitsap County Parks Department, and Judy Sawin is also on the team with the Parks Department. Our team is led by Sandy and Jeff with Fisher Bauma. They're the lead design consultants, and with them at Anchor is Lynn and John, and Barbara with Highland Economics. And we are very much supported by a group of great volunteers, Mark, Don, and Catherine, who have been with us every step of the way and making sure that this is really keeping in line with what the community desires. So next slide, please. Real quick, I just want to touch base of where we're at on the overall schedule. So this is our second public meeting, and a little bit contrary to what this graphic shows, we're actually just wrapping up the vision and program for the master plan. So we haven't quite yet started the alternative development. All of your feedback tonight is going to allow us to develop the program, which goes into the next phase, and that's going to start looking at 3 alternate spatial plans, which will be presented to you later in September, and we'll take the preferred plan and go into the development of the master plan. With that, Lynn, if you want to talk a little bit about how folks can get engaged.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. Hi again, everyone. So as you see on screen here, in addition to these public meetings, we have a lot of information for you on the website, which includes an interactive map. Both the map and the website are being updated with additional information as we move through the phases. We've also added some questionnaires that allow you to continue to comment outside of these meetings. So we definitely encourage you to take advantage of those tools. Looking ahead a little bit in our meeting tonight, I wanted to give you a preview of some of the opportunities for feedback in this meeting, just so you can be thinking about it as you hear information in the next section. For those who were in the first meeting, this might be a little bit familiar. We'll have a few interactive polls. We are going to set them up fresh for this meeting. They're going to be a little different than the word clouds we did last time. We will still have 2 separate ways to access the polls. The web browser option really works the best. So if you are able at some point during the meeting to open another browser window or to pull out a tablet or your mobile device or laptop or something to navigate to the web address that's shown here, and Judy's also putting it into the chat, you'll be ready to go when it's time. We won't need it for a little bit, but never hurts to be prepared. The second way you can participate is by text message. And if you want to use that method, you can send a text to the phone number 22333 with the message LYNNT 535. Don't click on the link, just keep that phone number in your text so that you can use it to respond to the polls later. This is like a American Idol kind of polling sort of thing. So I'll go over this again. I'll give you some more details on the polling a little bit later, but just wanted you to see the preview so that you can know about it, and in case you want to navigate to that web address or get your phone handy. So looking at the plan for tonight, we have a recap of the last meeting and the efforts to date, and then we'll hear about the programming, some of the challenges and opportunities that are the focus of this meeting. And then if you have any thoughts or questions as we go, I mentioned it for those who are on early, but you can use the Q&A function throughout the meeting. And we really, really do appreciate your input, and we'll make sure to incorporate it, whether you provide it in that Q&A box or through the polls or through the website. So I will pass the mic to Jeff to get into it a little further.
Thanks, Lynn. Good evening. My name is Jeff Bauma. I want to spend about the next 5 minutes just briefly reviewing the content from the first public meeting, which was held back in March. Next slide. We presented the landscape character. The land has been used for timber production for the last 150 years, yet it still supports a variety of wildlife. It consists of forest lands of stands of various ages, with most being about 40 years of age or less. There are wetlands, streams, the shoreline of Gamble Bay to the east. There's also a ridge that generally runs down the middle of the park from north to south, with views of each mountain range to the east and to the west. Once again, we want to thank Don Willott for a majority of photos that were used in this presentation. Next slide. In that meeting, we discussed the first phase of work, the discovery phase, and presented a brief history of the site. We outlined the planning context. We summarized the work done to date with community partners. We explained the land acquisition process the best we could, which includes use restrictions associated with those purchases. And we listed planning efforts done to date in the park that have resulted in approved projects, including the mountain bike ride park, the Sound Olympics Trail, and additional parking lots. Next slide. This timeline, which is also on the project website, highlights planning efforts since 2010 and shows the 4 blocks that make up the park. As I mentioned, each with specific restrictions on use or development. This brief review that I'm giving now and timeline don't adequately show the complexity of the cooperation that was required among all partners for more than a decade to make this park a reality. Next slide. We presented the vision and goals, which consider conservation, recreation, and economics. The goals have been categorized in this Venn diagram by nature, shown in green, people shown in blue, and economics in yellow, but they really are all interrelated. These goals are guiding the master planning process and decision-making during this process. Next slide. We discussed demographics of Kitsap County, current recreation demand in Kitsap County, and the economic development potential related to the park and the surrounding community, including Port Gamble Town. Later in this meeting, we will discuss in more detail specific funding and revenue generating opportunities that could be used or help to offset operational and maintenance costs of the park, as well as economic benefits associated with the park for the county and the community. Next slide. We discussed inventory efforts based on GIS or computer mapping and field visits that were done for things such as soil, slopes and geologic hazards, emergency access, utilities, streams and buffers, wetlands, viewsheds, and habitats. In the next meeting, we will present the suitability mapping efforts, which are currently underway for both recreation development and forest regeneration based on overlays of all of this inventory information. The suitability maps will inform spatial planning within the park, which is just starting as a task of phase 3, which is alternative development. Next slide. We briefly described some of the opportunities that were beginning to become evident, whether they were projects such as physical structures, programs, policies, or ideas for generating revenue. We also discussed the potential purchase of remaining timber rights in the park. While all the land in the park is owned by the county, the timber company currently owns some of the timber rights. It's good to know that there are efforts underway that may lead to the purchase of some of these timber rights. Next slide. And finally, we concluded the meeting with breakout discussion sessions and a word cloud exercise, asking participants' preferences, which resulted in the generation of word clouds, which are shown here. So I'll now turn it over to David to briefly discuss a few of the planning efforts to date since that first meeting, and then I'll be back to present specific challenges and opportunities that could be included in the master plan.
All right, thanks, Jeff. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So since we last came to everyone here on the call back in March, the team has been very busy working with the various community and partner organizations identified, trying to work one-on-one and get specific input as it pertains to the various goals that we've identified for the project. We have received a lot of questions and feedback, both from the initial public session, as well as throughout the process and in the survey. So we'll be compiling those very soon. We've been trying to organize those into a frequently asked questions. Those will be posted soon. And then hopefully many of you on the call today were able to at least observe the panel session that we held a couple weeks ago, or perhaps viewed the recording. So I'll talk about that briefly, but and then our team has done a lot on inventory within the park and developing suitability mapping. So if we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. I think a large portion of the focus has really been gathering input, which really the team here has culminated together to present to you as the identified challenges and opportunities. So we've worked with various departments within Kitsap County, our local tribes, and many organizations, and we've kind of categorized folks and met with various folks based on roughly those goals that we've identified. And this list here is certainly not comprehensive. So we've been focusing a lot on education and economic development. And the list does continue. And hopefully you're going to see that the ideas presented here today really do reflect all of the input gathered by the community. And there's still opportunity for more input. We can go ahead and go on to the next slide, Judy. You know, one thing that we didn't originally have planned, which we didn't share last meeting, was this ecological restoration panel Q&A session. And again, this was a couple weeks ago. Hopefully many of you were able to attend that live. If not, there is a recording on the website. So please go take a look at that. We got a lot of feedback from the first public meeting of the concern with our goals and how they align with the intent to restore and conserve Port Gamble Forest Heritage Park. So the intent of this meeting was to really address these three questions, right? We got some experts who were able to share with us what really is a healthy natural forest, what is the condition of Port Gamble Forest, and what really would it take to get from where we are now to the desired healthy natural forest. Again, that video is on the webpage, and it links to the Kitsap County YouTube page as well. With that, we can go ahead and get on to why we're all here.
Thanks, David. So the slides in the meeting from this point on will focus on future efforts and opportunities that may address the challenges we have identified. Next slide. So the objective for this meeting is to present those challenges and opportunities with a comprehensive list of ideas that have been identified to date, and to gain an understanding of community preferences on three things. One, the use of the park, whether that's related to recreation, natural resource management, or environmental and cultural education. We want to understand your preferences on facilities and programs that support the above three use themes. And we want to understand your preferences on possible funding and economic development strategies. Next slide. So it's important to keep in mind the planning context, which informs the opportunities that we will be proposing and the decisions that will be made during this planning process. Before we dive into specific opportunities, I want to review or make you aware of a few high-level guidelines that we're working under. Next slide. First, that there are cultural resources on this land, and those need to be protected and respected. There are a variety of ideas on how this park could be used and the facilities that might be added in the park or adjacent to the park to support the recreational development and natural resource protection and enhancement goals. There's an understanding that the park will blend recreation with natural resource protection as portrayed in the community-generated vision and goals for the project. Given the condition of the land now and what it is anticipated to be after future logging, restoration activities will need to be actively managed to restore healthy ecosystems and to ensure public safety. We are planning under the assertion that just leaving the land as it is will not result in successful outcomes. Fiscal sustainability is important to the long-term health of the park. So the plan and implementation strategy will consider its economic viability as an important element. Ideally, park operations will generate revenue for maintenance and management. Building and managing the park is a long-term commitment. We must develop a sustainable and achievable plan that provides guidance for decision-making and has the ability to adapt to change. As far as decision-making goes, ultimate decision-making is the county's in close consultation with the tribes. And the county is sincere in having this be a community-driven plan, listening to the community and understanding your preferences. And finally, master planning is building on the significant work done today by the Stewardship Committee and the Kitsap Forest and Bay Coalition. Next slide. So I know that was a slide full of text. Hopefully moving forward here, there'll be a little bit more graphics to enjoy. So for this section of the webinar meeting, we'll be presenting challenges and opportunities, and we'll be asking for your feedback. So as such, we want to remind you again how to be prepared to do this. And Lynn will briefly go over this again in the next slide.
All right, so this is when we get to start those polls. So if you didn't get your phone or your computer or your tablet ready earlier, or open a new browser window or a new tab on the one you're already using, this is a good time to do that. So to participate, you're first going to join our poll session. You only have to take that step once, and then you're in for the rest of the meeting. So just this first step, I'm going to walk us through it here. Your first option is to use a web browser on either your mobile device or your computer or your tablet. And this works best because you can just click on your choices for each poll. So if you want to do it this way, open your browser, visit the address that Judy put in the chat or that's shown on here. It's that pollev.com/LYNNT535. And the polls will appear as I open them up, but there won't be one on there yet. So each time you'll just get to submit your response. It's easy peasy. It reloads automatically each new poll. If you would rather participate by texting on your phone, you first need to send a text message just to get into the session. So the phone number you send it to is 22333. And in the body of the text message, you type that keyword LYNNT 535. Once you press send on that text, you'll get a confirmation message that lets you know you're in the session. It'll give you a link, but you don't need to click on that. You can just reply to that same text message with your response to each poll as I open them up. And if you're using the text option, you'll just be entering single letters for your choices tonight. We have a sort of multiple choice. So I'm just going to hold here for 1 minute, Judy. We got that into the chat for people, the instructions for reference.
Yes.
All right, great. So when we do a poll, everybody's input will be displayed on the screen as the results start to come in. And I have a note up here that the service we're using has really good privacy. So, if you're feeling nervous, we can't see your phone numbers. You won't get any follow-up messages outside this presentation or anything. So Jeff, back to you to talk through what we're going to look at in that first poll.
Thanks, Lynn. So before we get to that, challenges and opportunities have emerged through our research on the project, our review of existing planning documents, stakeholder input, such as the public meeting, website questionnaires, field surveys, outreach efforts with community partners and users, and feedback from the steering committee. We've organized these issues and opportunities into 4 main categories or themes. They include recreation, natural resource management, environmental and cultural education, and funding and economic development. Next slide. So for each of these 4 categories or themes, we're going to discuss the challenges identified. We're going to review potential opportunities, and we're going to review both uses and facilities as well as potential programs. And then we're going to do a polling exercise for each one of those. Next slide. So so we'll start with recreation, the first themes. Challenges identified include having adequate access into the park and parking for a growing demand, determining trail classifications and thus standards for construction management and maintenance, minimizing potential for conflicts and defining allowable uses for a variety of trail users, identifying and decommissioning road trails and discouraging further road trails, understanding the capacity of the land for recreation development, understanding the potential timber harvest schedule and access and closure issues that could occur because of that, and finally, adhering to the restrictions for recreation development based on allowable uses per acquisition agreements. Next slide. So the following is a list of possible recreation opportunities that have emerged that might be appropriate for the park. We're not proposing that all of these facilities be placed in the park. They're simply opportunities to consider based on the feedback we've received. After we've gone through any of these opportunities tonight and you see something missing, please bring it to our attention using the Zoom chat function or go to the website and fill out the questionnaire. The first 4 items are grayed out. We're not going to talk about those in detail. Those are facilities that have already been approved for the park. We discussed these in detail in the first public meeting, so I won't do so tonight. More info can be found about these on the project website. Please also note that this list is of uses and facilities, not programs, which we'll discuss a little bit later. And you can now go to the next slide where I'll go through each of the items on this list in a little bit more detail, and then we'll have a polling exercise to understand your interest in some of these uses and facilities. So one of the opportunities is to have more trailhead parking at the park. This would typically be gravel surface lots within the context of the landscape, meaning minimizing disturbance, using existing landforms, and saving trees where possible. These are typically associated with restrooms, or there'll be a restroom at each one of them. Another opportunity is a tree adventure course. This would be approximately 7 to 10 acres. It would be located within the ride park, the mountain bike ride park that's approved. And for those who don't know, it's essentially a park with aerial trails using cables and platforms and with obstacles up within the canopy of the trees. This is typically run or would be run by a concessionaire for the county. And there have been discussions with a specific concessionaire about that, about an opportunity. Another opportunity is a picnic area and shelter. This would be approximately 1 to 2 acres in size. It would be accessible, built of natural materials to fit the context of the landscape, and have restrooms nearby. We've also heard a lot about disc or frisbee golf course. We would need approximately 5 acres of land. We propose starting with a 9-hole course with the option to expand and locating it within an area zoned as active landscape in the Stewardship Committee's landscape classification report. There's an opportunity for a small open air amphitheater, once again built out of natural materials. This we would want to be a multifunctional space and be adjacent to other facilities for educational purposes. There's an opportunity for nature-based playgrounds, once again accessible using natural materials, whether it be boulders, logs, root wads, also located in proximity to restrooms. Next slide. There are opportunities for low impact accommodations, basically camping. This would be tents. We're not proposing any RV camping in the park. Based on the size, this could possibly be up to 10 acres. We've heard a lot of people interested in this particular facility. These obviously would have restrooms and be accessible near parking or roads. There's an opportunity for water access, a kayak canoe launch facility. It'd be near a parking area. This would be low impact, essentially a trail from parking, and signage to indicate that it is a water trailhead. There's also opportunities for birding and wildlife viewing areas. These destinations would be near particular habitats such as wetlands, and they'd be defined by structures or boardwalks to actually protect those critical areas. And then finally, another opportunity is an event staging area. This would provide the same function as the current Port Gamble airfield site. There's some uncertainty whether that would continue to be available for use in the future, since it's not on parkland and actually owned by Rayonier, the timber company. This would be an open area to be able to stage runs and rides and other events in the park. So with that, I'll briefly turn it over to Lynn for the first polling exercise.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so getting ready for the polling, I'll give us a little bit more time on this first one, and we'll probably get a little quicker as we go. So the first question that we're going to look at in the polling is we're going to look at those recreation facilities and uses that Jeff just presented. We're going to ask 2 questions of the same set. First, we're going to ask you to pick the 3 that are most of interest to you. And then we're going to have a separate question so you can pick the 3 that are of least interest to you. So we'll present you with the whole field of what he just talked about, this whole range of options. And we're going to do 2 questions. First question is going to be which 3 are most of interest? So your top 3. And then we'll do a separate question for which 3 are least interest. So your kind of your bottom 3 if you were ranking them. So I'm going to open the poll. We'll give it a minute here. Make sure this goes active. So, some people already are on top of it. So if you're using your browser, you can just click your top 3. I am gonna enter the options if you're using text. Oh, Judy's already on it. All right, so Judy put some options into the chat. If you're using text, you can just enter the 3 letters that you want to choose as your top 3. If you are using your browser and you make a mistake, there's a button at the bottom of the list to erase the last one. When you are done, just keep your browser open and wait for the next questions. We're just going to use that same meeting the whole time. So if you're using the text method, just type the 3 letters that correspond with your top 3 selections. You can put commas in between the letters and just send a single text. I know that the results coming in makes it a little harder to see the options. Sorry for that, but they are in the chat right now as well, A through J. And we have those pictures along the bottom that are sort of the cheat sheet for what you just saw in the range of options that Jeff presented. So we have a good number of responses so far, but it looks like they're still coming at a pretty steady rate. So I want to make sure everybody has a chance to respond, especially since this is our first question. I'm going to let it stay open for a little bit more, just so that people know. We're also going to be providing all the results in a meeting summary on the website later. So if you want to go back and see how people, I mean, it won't be individually identified, but if you want to see how the group voted, that'll be available later. Okay, we're up to 166 responses and it seems to have slowed to a crawl. So maybe we'll call that one good. If anyone is having trouble, please chat to the panelists and we'll try to help you out. Well, it looks like somebody's adjusting their answers. Okay, so since that was our first one, I was just kind of leaving it open to see how we did. When we get into these next ones, I think I'm going to set us a timer and we'll do about 2 minutes on each question. All right, so I'm going to stop this one. We have our top 3 for everybody. So our next question is going to be the same set of options, and we're going to choose the 3 that are of least interest to you. So here we go. Should feel familiar. Choose the 3 that would be lowest on your list if you were ranking them. The facilities that are of least interest. All right, glad to see so many people participating. Looks like we're still at a pretty steady pace. And just a reminder for folks who are responding by text, I know it gets really hard to see the letters once people start responding. So I just wanted to remind you that we did, Judy did put those into the chat for us, so you can try to look at that list to find your responses. Okay, we'll give it 10 more seconds, just if anyone's having trouble. And if you are really frustrated, we will make sure we provide some other ways to get your feedback at a later date. So don't feel like this is your only chance. Okay, I'm going to close that one. Jeff, back to you.
All right. Can you confirm, Lynn, that you can hear me? Can someone confirm?
Sorry, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay,
I was
great.
on mute.
my phone dropped me, so I had to switch over to computer audio. I wanted to make sure you guys were hearing me. All right, so the following is a list of trail-specific opportunities. As you know, there are over 65 miles of existing logging roads and trails in the park. A comprehensive trail system with standards will be developed as part of this master plan. Once again, the first item, the Sound Olympics Trail, which is the 6-mile shared use path, has already been approved through the park, so we won't go into detail on that. We've heard from many of you that you want more single-use trails in the park, but also heard from many of you that you prefer as many trails in the park to be multiple use as possible. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'll go through each of these items in a little more detail, and then we'll have a polling exercise again. Next slide. So there's the opportunity for more multi-use trails. These would be non-motorized trails, soft surface, meaning gravel or dirt. And these would be available to all: bikers, hikers, walkers, runners, equestrians, and everyone else on wheels that's non-motorized. There's also the opportunity to improve existing logging or fire roads. This provides for a wider trail for those of you who've been up there to experience that with bigger groups. These are gravel surface, so it would be a different classification trail, and this would provide a little bit different experience. There's also the opportunity for more single-use trails, for example, equestrian. This may not necessarily be a whole set of trails or a loop system of trails just for horses, but at least initial access from congested parking areas to the park interior where they could join the multi-use trails that exist there. There's opportunities for more mountain bike single-use trails. These would be single track, soft surface, including technical obstacles. And I'm specifically talking about outside of the ride park. The ride park now would be mountain bike only. So are people interested in additional mountain bike trails outside of that ride park? There's an opportunity for single-use trails for hiking and walking. These would be narrow, soft surface trails. There's also been some interest in what we're calling contemplative trails. So these would be for people on foot only. These would be narrow, soft surface, spur trails to destinations such as viewpoints, and would include things like benches to rest along the way. Next slide. There's an opportunity to create a series of loop trails. These would be of various lengths. They would be multi-use, so for everybody. Essentially, they would be concentric from the parking areas, meaning there'd be short, medium, and long loops throughout the park. Essentially, there's an opportunity to link a lot of the existing trails or fire roads without creating a bunch of new trails to create loop trails within the park. There's an opportunity for trails for electric and assistive devices, specifically on the STO, but also maybe some loops or spurs off of the STO or on multi-use trails. There's currently an e-bike pilot program occurring within the park. As far as trails for mobility, that's an opportunity for people of all ages, including those accessible for wheelchair users. And with that, I think we'll move to the polling.
Okay, so we're going to do this just like we did the last one, but this question will be for those trail specific opportunities that Jeff just presented. We're going to do the same thing. 2 questions, same options. First, we're going to pick the 3 that are most of interest, and then we'll do a second question to pick the 3 that are of least interest. So here's the range of options we're going to be using for those questions. So again, our first question will be, which 3 are of most interest to you? Okay, so that poll should be coming live. Again, if you're using your browser, you can just click your top 3. And if you make a mistake, there's a button at the bottom to erase it. If you're using that text method, type the 3 letters corresponding with the top 3 selections you want to make with commas in between the letters. And those are in the chat box now as well for reference. Give this another minute here. Lots of results coming in. Okay, and give this 10-second warning. Get those top 3 selected. Okay, and we'll close that one. Okay, so now we're going to use the same set and choose your 3 that are of least interest to you among the trail specific opportunities. Okay, here we go. The 3 of least interest. And if you need the letters for reference as they get covered up, they are in the chat box as well. You'll just use those to enter your responses by texting, or if you are on the web browser, you should be able to just select them. I'll give this about 30 seconds more. You're selecting the 3 that are of least interest. Okay, 10-second warning. Okay, I'm going to close that one. All right.
Thanks, Lynn. So we're still on recreation, but now instead of uses and facilities, we're going to talk about program opportunities. I'll go through each one of these in a little more detail and then do another polling exercise. So next slide. So there's an opportunity for bike rides and races. These would be organized events, both ongoing, such as some of these that you see listed here. These are scheduled for this year. There's opportunities for more bike rides and races. The same thing is true for trail runs and races. So organized events, these are ones, once again, that are scheduled for 2021. So there's an opportunity for more of those over the course of the year if you're interested. There's also opportunities for equipment rentals for trail use. This would be for a variety of bike types. This could be either in the park, adjacent to the park, or in Port Gamble town as now currently exists. So this would mean partnerships with local businesses. These same partnerships could also happen for the rental of equipment for water use, whether that's kayaks, canoes, or other non-motorized craft in the park or on the shoreline. There's an opportunity to provide access to mobility enhancing equipment for both trail and water use. For example, there's a piece of equipment called the Duet bicycle that allows for those opportunities. There's also an opportunity for guided nature walks, focusing on nature, culture and history. These would be for various age groups and abilities, and likely led by a volunteer program that would need to be created. Next slide. Similar to the last one, are guided foraging activities. This would need to be a managed program for sustainable harvest. It would have an educational and cultural aspect to it and be done in cooperation with the tribes. There's opportunities for birding and wildlife events, even more than currently occur on the site, taking advantage of shoreline, wetland, and meadow habitats that are improved or created, and be done in cooperation with Kitsap Audubon Society. There's also orienteering or geocaching programs that could be developed. This would also need to be a managed program to minimize impact and protect the resource using the existing trail system within the park. And finally, another idea we've heard is that There could be a need for food concessions. These would be small and event-driven, seasonal, and sourcing locally grown and raised foods.
Okay, so same type of poll for these recreation programs. Same two questions. Please select the 3 that are of most interest and the 3 that are of least interest to you. And here's what those options are going to be for these 2 questions that Jeff just went through. First up, we'll identify the 3 that are of most interest to you. I've seen a few comments from people who are having trouble with the polling. If we aren't able to answer your requests in the chat and get you access while you're trying to do the live poll, feel free to put a note in the Q&A that you'd like to be sent sort of your own version of the poll afterwards, and I can gather your direct responses and we can compile them with the rest.
It might be best to use the chat function, Lynn, just based on how the Q&A works.
Okay. Okay, hopefully that wasn't distracting. I'll stop talking about other things, sorry. So if everybody can select the 3 that are of most interest to you among the recreation programs. Give this 20 more seconds. Okay. Okay, we'll close that one. And now same options. This should be getting familiar by now. Please choose the 3 that are of least interest to you for those recreation programs. Again, we're working on the 3 of least interest. Okay, we'll give that 10 more seconds. If anyone wants to get their 3 least of interest selections in. Okay, we'll close that.
All right, thanks, Lynn. And just as far as timing goes, some housekeeping here. It looks like we're probably 4 or 5 minutes behind schedule. So if we want to spend a little less time on the polling, if it's possible, that would help us catch up, I think. So as far as natural resource management, for those of you who participated in the forest restoration panel 2 weeks ago, many of these challenges were presented and discussed. Challenges identified include transitioning the existing timberland to a sustainable and diverse forest. This will require the development of a forest management plan by the county. As part of that plan, thinning will likely be needed to improve forest health and habitat diversity. There's current uncertainty regarding timber rights and the purchase efforts. So what are we actually starting with? Are we going to be starting with newly planted, clear-cut lands, or are we going to be starting with stands of trees of varying ages and qualities? We also have to navigate the differing community priorities when it comes to natural resource management at the park. And we need to integrate the existing stewardship plan into the master plan. Next slide. So the following list of natural resource opportunities are those that have emerged. These are programs as opposed to facilities. We're jumping straight to programs. The reason why is that some of the facilities that could support these natural resource programs have been included in our next section, which is environmental and cultural education. So you'll see those facilities in a moment. All of these items that you see here may be important components of natural resource management. So the intent of this section is not to pit one against the other, but to make sure that you're aware of these opportunities and see which may be of importance to you. We'll also need to prioritize these opportunities for long-range planning and transitioning the land from a working timber forest to a diverse landscape. Next slide. Sustainable forest management is a strategy that's currently being applied in the shoreline block of the park. A component of that is selective thinning for forest health and habitat diversity. There's an opportunity for habitat enhancement, so attracting more wildlife from small insects to large mammals. There's an opportunity to create meadows. These would be multifunctional. They would provide views, wildlife viewing, pollinator habitat, and be fire breaks in between tree stands. There's the opportunity for shoreline restoration and conservation, so improving Gamble Bay habitat, whether that's upland, nearshore, or intertidal habitats, and doing so in coordination with the tribes. There's the opportunity for invasive species control. If you've been up to the site recently, you can see that the Scotch broom has really bloomed in those areas that have been cut. There's currently a volunteer effort that started up, so building on that. There's also an opportunity to increase species diversity, whether that be vegetation, birds, mammals. It really starts with planting for those habitats and identifying what the key species are that we're interested in. Next slide. There's the opportunity to protect, manage, and restore flora with historical ethnobotanical uses in coordination with the tribes. There's the opportunity for watershed restoration and protection, so managing to restore and enhance surface water for habitat, including fish-bearing streams and stream restoration. There's also the opportunity to provide hazard mitigation specifically for fire, so creating fire breaks and reducing forest fuels as a component of ecological restoration and thinning. So understanding what's the appropriate amount of woody debris to leave in the forest for habitat. So now I think we can go through the polling exercise again, Lynn.
Great. So similar setup, though, instead of sort of what you would be most interested in, we're going to ask you this time what you think is most important and least important. Same two questions, but since this is natural resource management, we just want to hear your priorities. I also saw from some of the discussion in the chat, we just want to clarify that, we're not voting tonight. This is really a poll to try to discern preferences of the folks who use the site, visit the site, enjoy the site, and want to have a say in its future. This isn't a vote where these numbers are going to be tallied and we're going to make a decision based on these polls. This is just gathering more information and just discerning your preferences more. Just one more data point. So these are the options for this question, and we should be live here. So please choose the 3 natural resource management priorities that are under the umbrella of forest regeneration that you think are the most important. And we'll try to go a little bit faster on this poll than we have in the previous ones. Hopefully we're getting the hang of it by now. Again, the letters, if you're doing it by text, are available in the chat. Okay, we're getting pretty close to our usual number of results for each of these questions. Okay, 5 more seconds. Okay, so now our next question is the 3 that you think are least important of those same options for natural resource management under the idea of forest regeneration. Okay, looking for the 3 of least importance. Give this one about 30 more seconds. Okay, about to close it. So if you can get your 3 of least importance in. Okay, great.
Okay, so we're now going to move to the third category, which is environmental and cultural education. Challenges identified include establishing partners with various educational institutions, whether that's K through 12, anywhere up through the university level. A challenge is determining the potential of the park, the forest, the landscape as a demonstration site for long-term monitoring and research, whether that research is based on forest regeneration, watershed, climate, or other items. It will also include developing policies for use by third parties. So there's a symbiotic relationship that benefits the county, the institution doing the education or research, and the community. Next slide. So the following list is a list of environmental and cultural education opportunities that have emerged. These are uses and facilities, and not programs, which we'll do next. I'll go through each of these in a little more detail like we've done in the past, and then we'll do polling. Next slide. So there's an opportunity for an environmental and cultural education center, and we have it listed as small to medium. You can see the second one down is the same thing, but it's listed as medium to large. Both of these would be for all ages and abilities. They would likely have restrooms associated with them, and they would also have parking and access for accessibility. Another option is a research facility. So this would have a natural resource focus and be in partnership with universities or colleges. There's been interest by several of them already about using the site as a potential research lab. There's an opportunity for a visitor center or a museum focusing on the park's natural and cultural resources and history. This would likely also have restrooms and be near access and parking. A little bit larger in scale would be a multi-use community facility. This would be multifunctional, focusing on the Port Gamble community and near parking or Port Gamble town. Another opportunity would be for overnight accommodations, specifically for education. This would be small and simple, bunkhouse style, and likely included in one of the other structures we've talked about, whether it be a research facility or an environmental and cultural education center. Next slide. A native plant nursery, so an area to propagate native plants for restoration. Restoration and forest regeneration within the park. This would be an opportunity for job training, as well as located near an education center or research facility on the site. Viewing platforms, whether it be a taller fire tower or a lower profile boardwalk, these could be appropriately placed within the site and be part of the interpretive story that's told on the site or within the park. And then finally, outdoor classroom areas. For example, open air shelters. These would be small, they'd be multifunctional, they wouldn't have walls, and these could be in different locations within the park as part of education and the cultural story.
Okay, so same kind of poll. We're coming down to the last ones of these. So the options for the environmental education facilities and uses that Jeff just mentioned, here they are in sum. And again, first up, you're going to identify which three are most of interest, and then we'll do a second question for least of interest. So 3 of most interest for environmental education facilities and uses. And the letters are in the chat. Do 10 more seconds. 3 of most interest for environmental education facilities. Okay, stop that one. And now we'll do the 3 of least interest of the same list. We're definitely getting quicker. I can tell a lot more results come in very early now. Hopefully I'm not cutting the time too short on everybody else. Give this one maybe another 20 seconds. 3 of least interest. Okay, we'll close that one.
Okay, so this will be the last list and poll for the third category, environmental and cultural education. This is a list of potential programs that have emerged. I'll go through each of these items in a little more detail, and we'll do the final polling exercise on this category. Okay, so there's opportunities for research. This would mean partnerships with tribal colleges and university, or even botanical gardens, focusing on natural resources, obviously, and forest regeneration. There's opportunities for a whole host of environmental education programs. This could include citizen science projects for adults or kids, collecting data such as bird data, water quality data. There's programs for K through 12, all the way up to and through college. There's currently a initiative called No Child Left Inside that would take place inside the park, and that's something to check out. There's also opportunities for cultural education. This would be in collaboration with the tribe. This could be associated with a facility or even without a facility, just using the site itself and walks like we've talked about, cultural walks and foraging walks and those type of things. There's an opportunity for job training. So natural resource-based jobs using the park and the restoration that's going to need to happen in it for that activity. There's an opportunity for interpretive programs, utilizing not only signs and kiosks, but a digital web-based platform. And once again, really focusing on the natural and cultural history of this and resources and history of the site. There's an opportunity for community, a gardening program, including a potential farmers market, either on site or most likely adjacent in Port Gambletown. Next slide. There's an opportunity for guided nature walks for various ages, groups, and abilities based on nature, culture, and history. This would likely be volunteer-led as opposed to county-led. Similarly, there's stewardship volunteer programs building on existing Port Gamble stewardship committee efforts. This would require a volunteer coordinator for a park this size and a program of this size. And finally, a program related to foraging plants with a cultural, educational focus for a variety of species within the park, and one that would need to be sustainably managed. So with that, we'll do polling again.
Okay, so as Jeff mentioned, this is the last poll in this section, but don't close out your window or your text session because we'll have a couple more questions later about funding. So for these options related to environmental education programs, please choose your 3 of most interest. Okay, looking good. Give it 10 more seconds. Okay, and let's move on to 3 of least interest of the same options. Okay, 3 of least interest. Let's give it 10 more seconds. Okay.
Thanks, Lynn. We'll move now into the 4th category of funding and economic development. And this relates to all the questions that you've been pondering in the preceding slides about land uses, because what the land uses are at the park will determine to a large extent what funding options are available and the level of economic development that's supported at the park. So just to cover quickly some of the challenges related to funding, and then we'll think about opportunities. So in terms of challenges, parks require money. All of the things we've been talking about require funding. Even just trails and restoration of habitats requires money. And just as an example, at the national level, on a per acre basis, it can be quite large. And obviously those costs per acre vary significantly based on the level of development and the facilities and the maintenance required, but it can be quite high. Another challenge, as Jeff covered earlier, there are existing restrictions on land use in the park. Another type of challenge is that revenue generation at the park, if we're looking to directly support park funding requirements at the park, requires likely more facility development and amenities that would attract people who would be paying for equipment rentals or food concessions or adventure courses or that type of thing. And then lastly, in general, the public expects that park use be free. So that's a challenge when thinking about funding, particularly if we're trying to have the park be self-sustaining. Next slide, please, Lynn. So in thinking about funding and economic development, there tend to be two categories. So if you're thinking about cost in terms of either how much we have to pay for the park or facilities, or how much we have to maybe give up in terms of land use for revenue generating activities. And if we think about how much funding those will, or revenue those will generate, we tend to have two categories of those options for recreation and programs that have relatively low cost. We don't have to give up much land, or we don't have to pay directly for these options, or they are, and those generate low revenue, or we have options that generate more revenue, more funding, but we maybe have to give up a little bit more land for those options, or we may have to pay more in taxes or that sort of thing. And then there are the low cost, high revenue opportunities, which we haven't figured those out yet. So if you have ideas about low cost, high revenue, then please go to the project website and submit ideas there. Or you can submit them in the chat here. And then anything that's high cost, low revenue, we're not really considering because those are sort of the worst of all worlds. Next slide, please, Lynn. So in terms of what we're meaning in terms of low cost, low revenue, so these are ones that wouldn't cost county residents in terms of having to maybe accept a land use that they're not as excited about, or that would be low cost in terms of fees or taxes or that kind of thing. So these would be things like revenue from forest management, for habitat restoration. So we're achieving that goal of habitat restoration. We're trying to eke out some revenue from that activity. Or we would be soliciting donations and grant funding and those sorts of things. And then lastly, potentially selling mitigation credits related to habitats and carbon sequestration and that kind of thing. So all three of these types and these other types of ideas are ones that the county and the tribes, the decision makers will likely be pursuing, since they're low cost options, but they'll also likely low revenue in the long term in terms of every year being able to get revenue. So we're going to focus on the next category, Lynn, of some higher cost, higher revenue options. So in this, we're kind of grouping everything in two here. So in this, there's also two types. There's revenue generation at the park. So this could include things like fees. So users that come, it might be a parking fee, maybe a general use entrance donation or suggested fee at the park. And keep in mind those use fees, there may be certain groups that wouldn't be required to pay. But fee generation is one type of revenue. Another is the facilities that we're talking about that were sort of higher level of development, like accommodations or facility rentals or visitor centers or event space or leases. Those would be another type of revenue at the park. And finally, there could be some leases for land uses like infrastructure or farming. Offsite revenue is not directly at the park, but because of the park. So for example, if the park attracts tourists and attracts visitors based on the facilities and the offerings at the park, then those visitors could generate lodging, sales tax revenues that go to the county to then help support the park indirectly. Also, there could be revenue offsite specifically related to the park, like taxes or development fees, and these could be dedicated to this park or to parks in general in the county. Next slide, please, Lynn. So first question, and we're not providing a lot of detail at this point about what specific facilities or locations some of these things might be at, but I just want you to think about, we'd really like your feedback on, in general, big picture. Would you rather the land uses at the park be really focused on the preferences expressed earlier, where it sounded like many of you wanted more, trails and trailhead parking, and not so much the facilities that might generate tourism and revenues like an adventure course or food concessions, that kind of thing. And think about, from a funding perspective, would you rather pay community taxes like property taxes or have a special assessment for parks? Or would you rather devote some of the parklands to some of those types of activities that might attract more visitors and more revenue at the park? So it's kind of the visitors help pay for the park through their fees, or we pay for it our own through taxes and we really keep the park for what locals want it for enjoyment.
Okay, so we set those two options into a poll. They're option A and option B. A, more community taxes, special assessment options. B, more of the revenue generating visitor facilities. And you have options of highly preference one of the options or the other, slightly prefer one of the options or the other, or you feel neutral between those two options. If you're responding by text, the options are numbered here, 1 through 5. So respond with which number correlates. And if you're responding on the website, it should be a clickable box. This is a little different than our polls so far. So give people a minute here to get a handle on it. We'll see a lower number of results because everyone only responds once on this one. Let's maybe give it 10 more seconds. Okay.
Okay, so this one's a similar question, but instead of having taxes or special districts or development impact fees, that kind of thing, we would have user fees at the park. And this could be either in the form of a parking fee, an entrance fee, a suggested donation, that kind of thing, versus revenue generating visitor facilities. So again, same more local fees or local payments versus potential from facilities.
Okay, so just like before, comparing these two potential funding mechanisms, which one do you prefer and to what degree? The options this time are those user fees for the park, like parking or entrance fees, and those revenue generating visitor facilities at the park. All right, moving a little faster. We will give it 30 more seconds. Okay.
So now we have 2 more comparisons here. So now we're looking at user fees versus community taxes or special assessments. So of those, what's your preference?
Okay, I think our responses are slowing. Maybe give it 10 more seconds. Okay.
And then the last comparison for different options is option A is leasing land in the park for users such as rights of way or renewable energy or farming, that kind of thing, versus using some land uses for facilities more geared towards visitors and revenue generation at facilities.
like everybody has a hang of this. Probably don't need to talk through it. Okay, we'll give it 15 seconds more. Okay.
So it looked like from the results that people in general in this group preferred taxes or user fees, and particularly taxes and assessments to revenue generating facilities. So in that case, if you were to have special assessment district or some type of fee that you'd be paying annually, how much would you be willing to pay per year to recreate at the park?
Okay, so this one just has options A through E if you're voting on text. If you're on the web, you should be able to click them. As Barbara laid out, this question's if revenues are not generated from other sources, how much would you be willing to pay per year through those taxes or use fees? Okay, 10 seconds more. Okay, great. Thanks for participating in the polls, everyone. Okay, back to David.
All right. Well, I think we're right on time. So good job, everyone. And thank you to everyone who hung on the line to the very end. We do have a lot of questions and comments in. It looks like Alex, sorry. I do want to let everyone know that, can you go to the next slide, Judy? We will be following up. There are some unanswered questions left in the Q&A chat box, and a couple people have asked about that. We will evaluate those as well as all of those that we tried to answer live, and we'll be providing these within our FAQ section coming soon on the webpage. And we'll be capturing all of this, including the chat, with the recording of this. If there are folks on the call who are not yet signed up for the email distribution list, please go to portgambleforestpark.com and sign up. I think the majority of you have already signed up. You do only have to sign up once. We don't want to flood your inboxes with information, but we'll try and share enough information to keep you updated and let you know when the next public meeting is. We will also be following up with a kind of a different form of survey after this meeting. The existing poll that was on the webpage is kind of at the end of its limits, so we'll be coming together as a team and figuring out what works for the next phase. Again, we'll announce what the exact date and time for the next public meeting, but we'll be evaluating your input as well as others from the various polls and whatnot that we've conducted to go into the spatial planning. With that, again, thank you very much, and thank you to our team for this interactive session. Hopefully it was exciting for everyone to see the crazy changes and the various opinions. And before I close, I guess, Alex, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
No, just to express my big appreciation and thanks to everybody who joined us tonight. Difficult questions, lots of, as we said it at the beginning, opportunities and challenges to mull over and work through. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.